Well, shalom. Welcome to another edition of Word Pictures in Ancient Hebrew. In this edition, we're going to continue going through the different pieces of armament that the Apostle Paul describes to us in Ephesians chapter 6. And as we do, we remember that not only was the Apostle Paul looking at a Roman guard and obviously relating to the pieces of armor that guard was wearing, but that he also was a Jewish rabbi steeped in rabbinical tradition and understanding, and therefore the Old Testament, what he would have referred to as the Scriptures, was an important source for him to be able to teach from. And I think once again in this particular piece of armament, we will discover that. Let's take a look at the piece we're going to talk about today. We're going to move on to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17, where he tells us, above all. Now, there's a hint. In other words, this one is important. Why is this one important? Well, I think we'll discover that embedded in the understanding that he had from the Old Testament Scriptures. Above all, take the shield of faith with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Well, the Apostle Paul knew full well that our faith was going to be paramount in how we were able to navigate this life, walking with God and resisting the enemy and the things of the world. And so he would have known exactly what the Old Testament writers, the scriptural writers in reference to him, would have said about these kind of things. I found a very interesting psalm. We look in Psalms chapter 18, verse 35, and we find these words. It says, "You have also given me the shield of your salvation." You see, when the Apostle Paul talked about our shield of faith, he knew that that was directly related to our salvation. And it's important that we persevere, that we protect our salvation. How do we do that? Well, when we translate these words into Hebrew from the Greek that we find in the New Testament, we find some very interesting terms that we can begin to look at. In this particular case, we find that the shield of faith is the magan imuna. And of course, you know that Marla Jean's talked to you about faith and what that means, but what is this idea of a shield? Well, the shield, magan, in the Hebrew, has a root word, and that root word is the word gan, the end of it, the gimel and the nun, which is garden. Now, isn't that curious? What does a garden have to do with being a shield? Well, we have to go all the way back to the original book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, Bereshit in the beginning, and we have to look at the scene in the garden. What happened there? In the garden, before sin came into the picture, God walked and talked with Mr. and Mrs. Adam. He had fellowship with them. Their interests were the same. They were involved in being focused on the same issues, on the same eternal proposals and propositions that God had. His purposes were paramount in their relationship. And I think what we need to understand is that our faith brings us back to that place. That's what redemption is all about. It's about rolling us back to that original relationship that man had with God. And so he wants us to have the same relationship with him now that he proposed to Adam and Eve in the garden. And that is that we walk and talk with him. And being in the garden is the safe place. Being in that place of fellowship and relationship with him is the safe place. It's the productive place for the things of the kingdom of God. And so you add a mem to the front of this, and the mem speaks of chaos. It just speaks of destruction and all of these kinds of things, confusion. And so we know that the shield of faith does what? The shield of faith is something that protects us from that chaos and from that confusion. And if we're protected from that, then we are, in essence, back in the garden setting with God. We're in a place where we have communion and fellowship with him. What an interesting concept, this idea of a shield of faith. Well, I just pray that these sessions we've had where we're working through the articles of armament that the Apostle Paul talked about and adding a Hebraic perspective, adding to these ideas the things that he would have known because of his background, because of his learning and his training. I trust that those things are making these pieces of armament more valuable to you. So until the next time that we get together, this is Word Pictures in Ancient Hebrew. Shalom.